Hello, this is the female Brownie X, and I am, ill, I guess. So I decided to do something useful with my time and do a dramatic reading. I'm going to do a dramatic reading of Sweet Apple Massacre. Yup. So, yeah, I'm reading this shit because I'm bored and I have nothing better to do with my life. Yeah. So I've only ever read this like once or twice. I couldn't read it again because it was so damn awful. But so I have a lisp as well, so that's why it might be shit. I tried doing cupcakes and yeah. Okay. Sweet Apple Massacre. Big Macintosh surveyed the many apple trees that made up Sweet Apple Acres. It was nearly apple book season once again, and it looked as if though they were having a bumper harvest this year. He nodded, satisfied. His sister Applejack walked up beside him. "Whoa, boy howdy! I sure am glad you ain't injured this time, Big Macintosh," she said. "Why, there's even more apple on them trees than last year." "Yup," Big Macintosh replied in his characteristic manner. "Them sure a lot of apples." Applejack was silent for a moment, enjoying the feel of the slight breeze against her blonde mane. "Say, I don't suppose you've seen an apple bloom anywhere, have you? Have ya? I've been looking for her all day, and she ain't nowhere to be seen." Big Macintosh shook his head. "Sorry, sis. Can't say that I have." "Darn that silly filly! Probably gone off somewhere with her friends. I hope she ain't getting herself into any mischief, or there'll be hay to pay." "Don't you go worrying yourself, Applejack," he replied. "I'm sure she's perfectly fine. But anyway, I need to go to the barn. I gotta go pass some apples for some of my home brewed apple cider. I have picked a few apples earlier, all nice and plump, and ripe, and they ain't gonna press themselves." Applejack laughed. "You sure do love your cider, don't ya? Just make sure Apple Bloom don't get a hoose on it again. We all know what happened last time." Big Macintosh chuckled with his sister. "Yup." The large red pony trotted back to the farm and gently opened the door. He opened a trap door with his mouth and went down the steps into the old dusted apple cellar. Usually it was just filled with junk, scrap metal, old worn out poles, old rope, various other bits and bobs that had outlived their use. Big Macintosh often came down here when he wanted to get away from the world, to withdraw for a little while for some peace and quiet. Today was different, however. The old rope at least had a new use, because in the cellar space were Apple Bloom and her fellow cutie mark crusaders, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, bound and gagged, propped against the wall. The 3 pairs of scared round eyes looked up at Big Macintosh as he approached. Now then, you 3 fillies," he said, as placid as ever. "Y'all need to learn a lesson. You need to learn not to mess around with Big Macintosh. All I ever want is some peace and quiet." He looked directly at Apple Bloom. The little red-haired filly cowered under his gaze. "All I want is a quiet life, without all you cutie-mark crusaders running around the place making with the noise. When I'm finished with y'all, there's going to be no noise from you ever again." Big Macintosh approached. Scootaloo flapped her wings, struggled to get off the ground. Big Macintosh laughed and grabbed one of her wings. He twisted it, slow at first, and watched the pain visibly glow in her eyes, and then turned hard, smiled slightly as he heard a snap, and muffled whimper that came from Scootaloo. He then threw her to the ground. Your wings are useless, ya silly filly," he said presently. He went to the toolbox and took out a rusty knife with a jagged blade and dropped it in front of the 3 fillies. "I'm going to take those gags off now," he said. "The first one of your screams gets the tongues cut." He took off Sweetie Belle's gag. She looked up to him with terror, but managed to stay quiet. Next was Scootaloo. She let out a strangled whine and then breathed heavily. still in horrendous pain from her broken one, but managed to resist the temptation. Finally, he removed the gag from his sister Apple Bloom. She started at him with her round eyes filled with fear and incomprehension. Surely this was just a horrible joke, but she had just seen what he had done to Scootaloo's wing, and it certainly was no joke. She took a deep breath. Applejack! Big Macintosh shoved his hoof in Apple Bloom's mouth, silencing her scream. He sighed and shook his head. I told you not to scream, Apple Bloom. You should listen to your big brother. I'll scream, and I'll scream again, and Applejack will hear, and... Apple Bloom said silently, You know, I was kind of hoping you'd do. After all, I still haven't forgiven Applejack for that injury she gave me last apple book season. If you want Applejack to join y'all down here, scream away. I, for one, will welcome her company. But now, to business. Big Macintosh picked up a knife and loomed over the cowering Apple Bloom. He pinned her down with a powerful hoof and stuck the knife into her Apple Bloom's mouth. Sweetie Belle vomited at the sight, the thick yellow chunks of acid-smelling liquid splattering heavily on the floor. Scootaloo managed to not be sick, but rather gasped with some effort. And with some effort cut out her tongue. No, I've lost my place now. but rather gasped and sobbed and choked with panic. Big Macintosh forced open Apple Bloom's mouth and with some effort cut her tongue. Apple Bloom tried to scream, but her mouth was too full of blood, so it was more of a muted gurgle. After a short while, she collapsed, tears streaming from her eyes, falling unconsciously from the shock and pain. Big Macintosh then took the tongue and rolled it in a puddle of putrid vomit in the floor. He smiled at Scootaloo. You hungry? Scootaloo shook her head viciously and cast him a defiant look. If Rainbow Dash were here, he would crap the crap out of you! You maniac! Big Macintosh shrugged. Well, she ain't, and anyway, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Rainbow Dash ain't as tough as she likes to make out. He shoved the vomit-covered tongue into Scootaloo's mouth and used the hoof to clamp her mouth shut. Don't you go trying to spit that out now, he said calmly, with a little laugh, and the filly shaked and squirmed. Didn't your mother ever tell you how important it was to chew your food? Scootaloo closed her eyes and flapped the one good wing desperately, eventually swallowing Apple Bloom's tongue. Holding the withered Scootaloo's down his hoof, then mounted the orange filly and sealed his penis into her tight virgin pussy. Whoa! What? Okay. Raping her for several minutes with Sweetie Belle watching, trembling with revolution. Apple Bloom was still out cold, blood pouring from her torn mouth. Cutie Mark Crusaders rape victims, Big Macintosh said with tender mockery as he fucked Scootaloo, following a gentle chuckle. Guess y'all found your person laugh. Your special talent is getting raped. Yup. Eventually, he withdrew from Scootaloo and grabbed her head tightly and repeatedly punched her hard with a hoof in her face, causing her nose to shatter and purt with blood. He scooped up some of the blood, some of Scooty Bill's vomit, into his tongue and held it into her mouth so that it mixed with saliva, and then he brought his mouth close to Scootaloo and spat the rank mixture into her mouth. He clamped her hoof over her mouth and held her nose until she gagged, eventually had no choice but to swallow. Scootaloo wrenched and spat and cried. He turned to Sweetie Belle. He grabbed her easily, but she was too shocked and traumatized to respond, and with the apparent amusement, he rammed her horn up Scootaloo's ass. The horn was too big and hard, and so the skin around Scootaloo's ass ripped, and blood and fecal matter first tricked, then poured porcelain down Sweetie Belle's face, as well as urine as Scootaloo pissed herself. Well, that's part 1, I think. We shall go to part 2 soon, I hope. Okay. Alright.